So does that necessarily mean that that silver is going to come up to meet the S&P, or is it that the S&P can come down to meet back up with silver kind of thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It could be either or it could be a combination of the two. So, and that's one of the reasons why when you look at the prior chart and you look at just performance, yes, there are times where the S&P 500 does come down. Back in 2008, for example, yeah, and silver obviously got hit as well at some point. But you see the relative performance. The S&P lost a lot more than silver did. Uh, at some point during that 2008 sell-off. So you what you're trying to do when you gauge, from a money management standpoint, you're just trying to look forward and say, okay, how much more downside is there relative to another asset, or how much more upside is there? And at this point, silver, for me, looks a lot like a lot better value, or a lot more potential to the upside over the next 5 years, for example, than the S&P 500. And yeah, it's all probabilities. So then I got into I wanted to show the relative price performance, which is here in gold, for example, relative to the number of ounces that come into the ETFs and mutual funds. And here in this gold chart, you can kind of see the ounces are in blue and the price is in yellow for gold. And you can kind of see there's actually a pretty decent correlation between price movement and the number of ounces. But where it gets interesting is the white metals. Palladium has almost no semblance whatsoever to ETF flows and the price of holdings. You can see here a massive dump in ounces came out of the funds and ETFs. At the same time, the price just skyrockets. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Do you think a possible explanation, Bob, would be that it has more of an industrial demand to it rather than a monetary or, let's say, inflationary hedge demand?
Yeah, no question about it. That's palladium and platinum obviously being used in industry a lot more than investment. That's certainly a viable reason for that. But at the end of the day, a lot of times these metals, the investment demand tends to drive the price, if that makes sense. Because industry is going to be fairly consistent in use. You're really looking at supply deficits or supply surpluses at that point, and that's where the investment side tends to absorb some of that extra supply. But here you have palladium, platinum, a little bit better in correlation, but you see that there are times where platinum leads the market in terms of the price, leading the number of ounces coming in. And there's sometimes where the number of ounces coming in has absolutely no effect whatsoever, and the price just collapses. You can see like a little hiccup here, just a little bit of platinum left the ETFs, but you had a massive crash in the price. So again, you're just trying to get some consistency with how institutional or retail investors act, and then how is that relative to the price.
So really, what's driving the price, right?
Yeah, you're just trying to figure out, do these ETFs actually have the effect that we all think they have when you see a lot of money flow coming in. Then you get to silver. Silver is interesting because silver, sometimes the price leads, you really have to look at it after 2000, because that's when ETFs and silver actually were developed. But here you have the price tends to spike, and you don't have the fund flow characterization where you had a spike in number of ounces coming in like you did on this upward channel leading up to 2011. And then you'll have times where even more metal is added to these ETFs, the price collapses. And then of course you have record high ETF fund holdings, and the price has gotten nowhere near back to where it was in 2011. I mean, so there's a lot of factors there that it's hard to make a strong correlation with that. And then what I did was I tried to show a period of time, like 2008 was a great period where you had this is the silver ETF from January to September. In blue here is the number of ounces coming into the fund, and you showed a strong projected upward movement in fund flows coming into that fund buying ounces. Oddly enough, the price in red, the price tanked in March, and yet there were still ounces relatively coming into the fund. It kind of went sideways. You never really saw a big drain in the silver ETF. Mm-hmm. And then you got to August timeframe where the price peaked out. I think you actually had a Sunday bloodbath, that started this whole mess. You actually had between this period when silver ETF really started to sell off, or I'm sorry, when the price started to sell off hard, you had an enormous amount of ounces come into the fund. I think it was 5 or 10% of the world's production come into, or maybe as much as 15% of the world's production come into the ETF in a very, very short period of time, yet the price dropped 25% in value. So, I mean, that's a head scratcher right there. So otherwise you typically see absorption, at least the price would stabilize, you would think. Mm-hmm. Well, then what I did is I said, okay, you had 43 million ounces or so added into the silver ETF during this January to September timeframe, which is 1,500 tons. Then you look at the futures market, and this is the open interest of the futures contract for the silver COMEX contract. And you can see really from January or actually from March when it peaked out, actually toward the end of the year, you had over 100,000 contracts liquidated, which mm-hmm. is 500 million ounces, which is about 17,000 tons, which is basically 10 times the activity that came into the silver ETF. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the price action, you can see that the price action mirrored the futures price much more so than it did mirroring the actual physical market. Mm-hmm. As people were accumulating more silver, you didn't see that it didn't really have the impact on the overall market. And of course, anyone who was in the market in 2008 saw real tightness in a lot of the retail products. You saw up to 4 months of delays in delivery to get Silver Eagles or anything silver. It was just crazy.